Hi, my name is Trainmaster04, and in this video I am reviewing possibly one of my favorite locomotives I've reviewed up to this point in my YouTube career, and that is none other than the Lionel Legacy Polar Express, but the Lionel store exclusive in the beautiful laser metallic blue. So without further ado, let's get started.
Albuquerque engine 3001. Starter up, stand by to pull. Over. Copy that, Albuquerque. We'll start her up. 3001 out.
Start this video off right, like usual. Let's begin with the history behind the real Perry Marquette 1225. 20 years ago, on 2004, November specifically, the world was met with a brand new Christmas action-packed musical movie called The Polar Express. A revised version based off of the Christmas book. Warner Brothers decided, let's go all out and create a new action-packed, live-action animated movie with a wonderfully detailed steam locomotive that goes across from Michigan all the way up to the North Pole. In order to do this, the Perry Marquette number 1225 ended up being the basis for the CGI locomotive in the movie, and as a result is now considered the real Polar Express to all rail fans out there in the United States and abroad. So as a result, the model you see in front of you is actually Lionel's Gen 1, or actually technically the revised Gen 1 Perry Marquette or Nickel Plate Road Berkshires, and in this case, technically the Perry Marquette 1225, just with an extended pilot up front and, of course, the beautiful blue paint scheme. So, for the history segment, I'll actually be going through the history on the Perry Marquette 1225. This locomotive is considered a Berkshire-type steam locomotive with a 2-8 four-wheel arrangement underneath the boiler. She was originally part of the N1 class of locomotives built in 1941 by the Lima Locomotive Works and had a total of 12 other siblings, numbered from 1216 through 1227. She was primarily used as a freight hauling locomotive on the Perry Marquette, which in this case, the Michigan Railroad was not one of the larger and well-known Class 1 railroads in the United States, but still was very prominent in her role. Perry Marquette herself was eventually retired in 1951, but was saved, thankfully, and donated in 1957 to the Michigan State University, where it was displayed on the campus near Spartan Stadium. One of the few locomotives that actually got donated to a college campus. There was also a second Berkshire that was thankfully saved from the scrapper, and that was engine number 1223. She was also displayed at the Michigan State Fairgrounds in Detroit. Currently, 1223 resides in a park in Grand Haven, Michigan. So really, these locomotives stayed well and true with their original origins. It wasn't until in the 1970s when the 1225 really began seeing her downfall, but this also ended up becoming a turning point and honestly something really hopeful for the steam preservation community. In 1970, a student organization that had a great passion for steam locomotives decided to get the bright idea to go out to their local steam locomotive and actually restore it to operation. A very massive task, but the Michigan State University Railroad Club actually was able to do it. It took them multiple years to actually go and tear down the weather-ridden locomotive to the bare minimum and actually be able to see what in the world they had gotten themselves into. Eventually, the MSU institution eventually conveyed a new organization called the Michigan State Trust for Railway Preservation, now known as the Steam Railroad Institute, and it was until 1983 that the 1225 was actually able to be moved to Owasso, where she is currently right now, and currently operates out of at the Ann Arbor Railroad Shop. And it wasn't until 1988 that the locomotive actually was able to operate under its own power. Currently, over the past 40 plus years, the locomotives required 3 new boilers, whole new running gear, and also various other overhauls in order to keep the historic locomotive operating. As a result, the locomotive has become quite a fan favorite, being a semi-powerful, well, more likely the first type of superpowered steam locomotives of the United States with its four-wheel trailing truck underneath the massive firebox. The locomotive currently operates through the Michigan landscape from Owasso and other areas in the region, pulling the famous Polar Express during Christmas time, always being sold out, and continuing to preserve steam heritage in the Michigan area to this very day. She's even done multiple excursion runs with the other famous Berkshire, a little bit less powerful than compared to 1225, but don't say that in front of the Nickel Plate Road 765, and has currently made many memorable trips for young and old to really enjoy and get an understanding of the real steam heritage feeling. With the history taken care of behind the real 1225 and also its critical role between the book and the movie, let's go ahead and go over all the stats and facts on the model you see in front of you. This model is a special release that Lionel put out and originally released in their 2024 Volume 1 catalog. This model is, the reason why it is a specialty release is because you can only order it through Lionel's online store. This model was limited to a random number of production orders, and as a result is probably going to be one of the most sought after locomotives in the next few years, especially when Christmas time comes back around in 2025. This locomotive was shipped around November to October of 2024, so it came in right at the good time before Christmas. However, unfortunately, it did not come in with the matching passenger cars, especially the updated observation car that Lionel finally listened to the community to make. So as a result, later on in this video, when this locomotive's running around the layout, you will not get to see it being pulling any of the official Polar Express passenger cars, but instead some dirty old boxcars. For measurements, this locomotive has a total combined length of 26 inches, making it have a middle of the road and reasonable minimum curve radius of 0.54. Under the hood, this locomotive is powered by a single flywheeled motor towards the back of the locomotive and is also equipped with two fan-driven smoke units, one of which being located up front for the main smokestack, and the second one being located towards mid-boiler for the smoking whistle. Now, in order to fill both smoke units with smoke fluid, Lionel opted to actually make both smoke units attached to each other and, as a result, making you fill smoke fluid only directly through the stack. I can say, and as will be shown later on this video, this locomotive has no shortage of steam coming out of either the front nor through the whistle, which is a nice comparison considering that usually when Lionel does this with locomotives of whistle steam, most of the smoke that's supposed to go out of the whistle ends up coming out of the stack, but in this case, I can assure you this is not really prevalent. With those details taken care of, let's go ahead and take a closer look at the model and go over all the details. Starting at the front of the locomotive, here at the pilot, as you can see, it is fairly lackluster in the detail department due to it actually having the correct movie appearance pilot instead of the typical boiler-tubed pilot with various details such as a center-mounted scale dummy coupler and also brake hose detailing skirting around in this general area. Now, this pilot is actually fairly new, coming out around 2017, when Lionel actually decided to duplicate their Perry Marquette and Nickel Plate Road tooled Berkshires and actually modify them to include this extended pilot for more movie-correct accuracy. So as a result, if you actually go online, you will find earlier generations, specifically the first and second gen Polar Express Berkshires, and they'll instead have the scale pilot with the boiler tubes and various other equipment accessories. In this case, it is nicely painted with that beautiful blue. As you can already tell, there are hues from, depending on the angle of the camera, purple in one area and then blue in the rest, which really is going to shine once we get around to the side of the locomotive. Other details include two separately applied flagpole stanchions, molded in polling holes on the front, and also some little hand grips on either side. Up in the center, there are two separately applied air compressors, which do look quite nice. I do wish Lionel would have painted them either in the smokebox gray, which we'll take a look at later, or even black to really stand out, but they still do look nicely detailed. Separately applied grab irons on either side of these two separately applied running board steps, two air compressor shields, and then a separately applied grab iron in the middle. Now, do take note there is quite a large gap in between these two shields, and that's due to there's actually a lack of detail that Lionel did not include on their Polar Express models. However, if you have ordered the Perry Marquette 1225 or any of the other similar Berkshires, this area is fairly covered up and shouldn't have this big open gap leading right back into the frame. Moving on up and now taking a look at the smoke box front, and as you can see, it is actually painted in a very nice looking gunmetal gray. It is a little lighter than I would want it to be, but in overall perspective, it very much is a nice compromise instead of the entire locomotive being painted in the laser painted blue, which in my opinion is a bit of a nice contrast. Detail-wise, it is littered with very much nice detail in the form of two separately applied marker lights, which are equipped with the bi-color lighting system, which means these lights can be changed from either green, white, or be simply turned off. They are nicely painted in that blue, something I was not expecting from the initial viewpoint. I would have expected them to be pre-made and pre-painted in black, but thankfully Lionel actually went ahead and made the initiative to make a match with the entire locomotive. Up top of the smoke box, there are two separately applied illuminated number boards with the clear and crisp 1225 within them, and straddling in between those two number boards is the brass bell. In this case, this locomotive is not equipped with the swinging bell feature, but Lionel actually did go ahead and make the bell an actual turned brass piece instead of it being a detail piece that is simply painted to look like brass, something that they have been guilty of for the last few years. And finally, in the center, mounted onto the smoke box door, is the headlamp itself, which is nicely adorned with the typical headlight brow up top, something very unique to the 1225 and a handful of other steam locomotives of this age. Two illuminated number boards on either side, and then a standard number board hanging underneath the headlamp itself, again in that beautiful white crisp font. And then finally, getting my stick in to the right position, you can see that the smokebox door, like any other legacy locomotive or even Vision Line locomotive, it actually opens to reveal the interior of the model. Moving over to the engineer side of the locomotive, starting at the bottom working up to the top, here down below is the front set of pilot wheels and also the first set of cylinders on the locomotive, along with the valve gear and side linkage. In this case, this area underneath the running boards themselves are almost completely painted in that beautiful blue, with some contrast coming from the polished side rods and also the blackened drivers and pilot wheel. Really gives the locomotive a nice depth to it. For detail-wise, the cylinders, the paint on it is so very clean, which even extends even further down on the locomotive's boiler, as well as the tender, but is also modestly detailed with a molded-in mechanical lubricator, separately applied piping on top, and also is nicely equipped with the correct Baker valve gear and valve gear linkage. The running boards themselves, unfortunately, do not have safety tread on top, probably due to the paint needing to be adhered properly to the die-cast metal, so that is a bit of an oomph in comparison to other Berkshires, but there are a few sacrifices that do need to be made. And then the boiler itself is very, very clean and crisp. There are, especially near the seam between the smoke box and the end of the boiler itself. Unfortunately, the camera really cannot pick up how clean this transition line is. There is no overspray whatsoever that can be seen by the naked eye between the graphite gray and the laser blue. In this case, it is a very nice transition in my opinion. Detail-wise, it is what you would expect. Separately applied throttle linkage leading into the superheater on this model, separately applied grab irons, as well as a handrail that runs along the upper portion of the boiler, nicely painted also in that laser blue, as well as the stanchions themselves. Nice little details that make this model worth your time. The smoke box itself has molded-in rivets, piping, two separately applied builder's plates, one for the Lionel Locomotive Works in the iconic diamond shape, and then the boiler itself with molded in rivet detailing and boiler bands and injector appliances out the yin-yang. Shifting over to the center of the locomotive, here again you can get a full view of the 8 driving wheels underneath the locomotive. Still does look quite nice with the black accent underneath. And then for the details, as you can see, they just keep on coming, and really that blue paint scheme come into the light. In this case, the locomotive underneath still has the continuation of that power reversing gear. In this case, here is the power reverser itself, a separately applied item, as well as a separately applied linkage going up all the way up into the cab, a larger air compressor tank, another separately applied item, and then on the boiler itself, it is still nicely detailed with various molded in washout plugs, boiler bands, stanchions to lead up to the sand dome, which we'll get to later when we get up to the top of the locomotive, and molded in sand pipes leading down to the various areas underneath the drivers. And finally, coming to the firebox cab area, at the bottom here is the 4 set of trailing wheels for this locomotive. In this case, as everything else, it too is nicely painted in a matte black finish, and the detail surrounding this area is so much a typical item from a Berkshire. In this case, you have the classic wide firebox side with all of the molded in rivet detailing, stay bolts, and whatnot. The ash pan is separately applied, allowing there to be a gap in between the bottom of the pan and the bottom of the firebox, allowing for the firebox glow effect to come out nice and bright when the locomotive's working hard around your layout. There are some more various molded in and separately applied pipework for various appliances on the locomotive. The running board itself comes to an end at the front of the cab and also comes down underneath to create a step system so that crew members can access the side of the cab itself. And speaking of the cab, it is nicely detailed with various appliances, hatches, molded in rivets, of course, the beautiful gold 1225, clear cab glass windows on either side, one up front and here over onto the side. Unfortunately, the locomotive does not have another window for operation in case of opening and closing, but it does have the single one to give a little bit of detail. Up top, there is a molded in sun visor and then a separately applied grab iron. Looking inside the locomotive's cab, as you can see, it is nicely detailed and also well illuminated with an overhead LED cab light. And detail-wise, Lionel actually went ahead and stepped up by painting the gauges and valves inside the cab. Typically, you wouldn't see this with every single legacy locomotive that they've been putting out, but it is definitely a nice addition considering this is a one-of-a-kind, extremely rare model that was only produced or sold in Lionel's online store. There are 2 hand-painted crew figures, one for each side of the locomotive, and also in the center there is a typical flat firebox glow coming through the simulated holes in the firebox door. Now, do note that the cab interior is painted the same color as the locomotive itself, something typical for the actual railroads and actual steam locomotives that are preserved to this date, but it would have been nice to have made the cab interior painted maybe in a black or something a little duller like the smokebox gray so that it can actually be contrasted and appreciated a little bit more, but that is just my opinion. Coming on the exterior of the cab, it too is also painted in the beautiful blue and is detailed with 2 separately applied grab irons, one on either side of the cab, one up top for possibly a curtain in the near future. The cab deck itself has a nice little extension lip to help close the gap between the tender deck and the locomotive. Underneath there is a molded in coal auger simulated in the center, something that was actually correct for the real 1225. And then finally at the bottom is the locomotive's infrared drawbar. In this case, this is responsible for sending signals between the locomotive and tender. On top of the locomotive, starting from the right and working down to the left, here you can see up top on the smoke box, it is quite cluttered in comparison to other steam locomotives, with the Worthington feed water heater sticking out from the front, various water feed injector equipment over onto the side of the stack itself, and then also a molded in superheater patch towards the end of the smoke box. Now, as stated earlier, this model is equipped with 2 fan-driven smoke units, one for the main stack and one for the smoking whistle. And also, as stated earlier, both smoke units are tied together, meaning they share the same feed pipe. As a result, in order to fill both smoke units with the proper amount of smoke fluid, you just simply pour it directly down the stack. Moving on over into the boiler, here you can see the continuation of that boiler jacketing, such as the molded in rivet bands and also the clips in the center. Separately applied monkey's tail towards the center of the boiler, which allows oxygen to leave the boiler when it is actually being pressurized for the first time of the day. A molded in steam dome, which is just gorgeously painted, so smooth with that blue around the sides, especially the curved edge, something quite difficult for many other paint schemes I've seen in the past. In the center, here is the fairly large sand dome with 4 molded in sand hatches, 2 separately applied grab irons, one on this side and one on the other side. And note to self, for those who do have one of these Berkshires, these grab irons are meant to be pointing forward, as this would be indicated by the molded in step right here. As the thought would be, a crew member to reach up here would grab onto this grab iron while standing on this little post. Now, if you notice in the camera, the sand dome actually has something a little bit more to tell, and the hint of there being a seam right along the edge. Originally, when these locomotives were first produced in the early 2000s, these locomotives had their switches hidden underneath the cab. Well, this is the modern era, and as a result, Lionel has opted to go and make their fabled trick by making the sand dome a magnetic piece. Inside, this reveals all of the operating switches necessary to make sure your locomotive is running properly the way you would like it to be. Here is the run program switch, the Bluetooth on and off switch. Just like the Erie Triplex, this Bluetooth switch is instead now a Bluetooth on or Bluetooth off / 4-digit addressing, so do take note when you want to operate one of these locomotives under the cab 3. The smoke on and off switches for both the main stack and the smoking whistle. Now, thankfully, Lionel has made this piece a die-cast object, so in this case it sits quite snugly and really hides that seam quite nicely if you look at it from a distance. And finally, coming towards the end of the camera's view, here is yet even more equipment such as water injector, exhaust, a shield around the 3 separately applied hand-painted safety valves, and also a few other equipment on the fireman's side. And finally, looking at the roof of the cab, here you can see it is still nicely painted in that blue. Overall, the paint scheme is just completely flawless on this model, and it is accompanied by a molded-in turret with some nice molded-in hatches to reach all of the valves and piping hidden underneath. Molded-in rivet detailing, making its typical crisscross pattern on top of the roof, and then finally in the center, a roof vent hatch, which in this case is actually one of the smoothest ones I've ever seen on a Lionel model as of to date. Finally, taking a quick look at the fireman's side of the locomotive, and as you can see, it is primarily identical as compared to the engineer's side with a few minute differences, such as equipment for the Worthington feed water heater coming along over the second set of cylinders, a bit of an extended running board going over said equipment, and also a better view up top of the smoking whistle. In this case, it is actually mounted to the side of the steam dome, the dynamo generator, and also various other equipment on top of the boiler. Moving over to the tender and starting at the front, here you can see the detail-wise it is fairly blank in standards with other tenders, but there are a few nice little details such as 2 separately applied steps leading up to the molded-in tender deck. There are also 2 separately applied grab irons, also painted in the same plasma blue. On the panel itself, there are some more molded-in details and also a separately applied builder's plate up top. Molded-in detail-wise, there are some molded-in toolbox hatches, molded-in auger underneath the tender deck itself, some various separately applied molded-in piping underneath for various equipment on the tender itself. And then finally down at the bottom, here is the tender end for the wireless drawbar. Moving over to the engineer side of the tender, and as you can see with the semi-smooth surface of the side paneling, the tender really has a tendency to reflect any form of light back into the camera lens. So in reality, when you see this little white spot that's actually light shining off of my white t-shirt that I'm wearing during this video. But detail-wise, it is stunning with all of the molded in rivet detailing, the gold Polar Express in its typical Polar Express font in the center, and also the nicely detailed six-wheeled trucks underneath the tender frame. Overall, the tender is very nicely done, with the plasma blue just being flawless, the lettering just shining off of the side paneling of the tender, and the detailing on the trucks, especially it being painted black, being a beautiful contrast with the shiny blue. Looking at the back of the tender, starting at the bottom, working up to the top, here again are two separately applied ladder stanchions leading up to the tender deck itself. In the middle, here is a separately applied coupler cup bar. In this case, it does not have a separately applied chain leading down to the coupler because, in this case, like any typical legacy locomotive, the coupler on the tender is the locomotive's electrocoupler, which can be thrown by using Lionel's legacy, Team CC, or even Bluetooth command systems. The tender back plate itself is also nicely detailed with two separately applied grab irons, separately applied ladder leading up to the upper deck, some nice railing up top for crew members to hang on to if need be. The panel itself has some molded in rivet detailing, a molded in backup light, which comes on when the locomotive's put into reverse, a separately applied grab iron to grab onto when you're walking in between the locomotive's coupler cup bar and the ladder itself, and it also even has some pretty graphics, such as the 1225 and some tender stats on the water and coal capacity. Finally, on top of the tender, here you can see it is still nicely detailed with the realistic coal load up front, a separately applied ladder leading up from the water deck to the tender's coal bunker. In this case, it is semi-hidden underneath this molded in coal shield, but it is a nice little detail nonetheless. On the tender deck itself, it too has some details, both molded in and separately applied. On the molded in front, the deck is nicely detailed with rivets. And then on the separately applied side, there are three sets of grab irons going around the outer perimeter for safety, of course. And then in the center, there are three separately applied water hatches, which are operable by just simply lifting them up. In this case, Lionel has opted to make this area itself blank, but it is nice to see that they actually added a painted metal black piece inside to give it the depth of there actually being a bunker. Now, originally, Lionel would have hidden a volume control knob in here for the tender, like in their Gen 1 Berkshires or even in their Team CC Berkshires, but in this case, since Lionel has updated the electronics, they have opted to remove the manual volume control knob altogether, and so, as a result, this little area is just a void. Now that we've gone over both the locomotive and tender, let's go ahead, fire up this model, and go over all of the sound features. Now, before I start up this locomotive, just as a little side note, since Lionel actually used movie clips for the crew chatter in this model and also the other Polar Expresses that they've offered, Lionel opted to delete any form of startup and shutdown sequences that include any of the crew talk. So as a result, when you get one of these Polar Express models and you go and start it up and you don't hear any of the crew chatter that would usually come with the extended startup and shutdown, do not be alarmed, but instead understand that instead of having any of the crew chatter, Lionel just wanted to give you the locomotive startup. So, without further ado, here is the shortened startup. With the locomotive fired up, let's begin with all the sound features, in this case, the 5 different whistles included in this model. Next up, here are the 5 different bells. Here is the steam blowdown sound. Here is the water and coal fill-up sounds. And finally, here is the crew and tower comms. As stated earlier, the crew chatter is actual movie clips from the Polar Express. So as a result, hopefully this video will not be taken down off of YouTube due to copyright reasons, but for the sake of this video, I'll go ahead and chance it and play a few of the sound clips.
I want to.
All aboard! This is the Polar Express!
I want to.
Safeties are lifted. Ease off the coal till we get a signal. These long waits are brutal. At least the back kid keeps the coffee hot. Ashpans are empty.
And finally, the crew chatter actually does change when the locomotive's in motion, so as the locomotive's running around the layout, you may hear a few different dialogues that were not present here in this stationary segment. Alrighty, I got some cars hooked up behind the tender. Unfortunately, they are freight cars, and that's due to Lionel still not having the fully heavyweight scaled Polar Express passenger cars out to dealers or even in private hands. And most of my semi-scale fleet of Polar Express passenger cars in the Baby Madison style really does not look too good behind a fully scale-fledged locomotive, so I opted to go somewhere in the middle and say, okay, the Polar Express is now pulling a freight train now that it is after Christmas, so it's going back to its freight life. But without further ado, let's get this freight train out of the yard. Well, that about wraps up this product review, but before you go, let me go ahead and answer the two questions that I normally ask around at this time of the video, and they are, what is the original MSRP price for one of these models, and also, what is my opinion on it? Well, to start off, the original MSRP price from Lionel's store is right at $1,700. Now, take into consideration that this is the same as MSRP price as any of the other scale Berkshires, that is actually quite reasonable, considering Lionel very well could have included another $100 or $200 onto the MSRP price, since this is a special model. Now, do take in mind, since this is the 20th anniversary special Polar Express only released on Lionel's online store, that means there's only a limited amount actually produced and sold out there on the market right now. And that means once they're gone, they are completely gone forever. Now, before making this video, I did go and do some sleuthing and did find a single semi-used Berkshire on the secondhand market. And as a result, and as expected, these models have immediately skyrocketed in prices, with that single model retailing for $2,600. So in hindsight, if you weren't able to get one of these models when they first came out, you'll definitely have to spend a little bit more money on the back end on the secondhand market. In my opinion, I do think it is a bit of price gouging from those who are trying to flip these models, since they are in limited numbers out in private hands. So if you're able to find one, or at least find one that is actually being sold by a legitimate modeler and actually knows what the value of these models are, I would definitely go with one of them instead of some form of online secondhand market where there's a ton of flippers out there. With the MSRP price out of the way, let's go ahead and move over to the second question, which was, what is my personal opinion on this model? Having grown up with the Polar Express over the last 20 years, and actually being 20 years old myself, I am fairly biased when it comes to the Polar Express franchise, since it has made such a massive impact. But since this is a product review for you all to actually get some insight and actually decide whether or not you want to go ahead and purchase one of these scale Berkshires, I will attempt to make this opinionated segment as unbiased as possible. So, with that said, the model itself is actually quite nice. There is a few little details that I would have liked to have seen be different on the final product, but overall, I really do think this model is a home run. Yes, there are a few little details, as stated, that I just wish could have been different, such as the back head being black to match and also give a little contrast within the cab as compared to the plasma blue. And there was a little bit of a waddle as the locomotive would get up into higher speeds, something that kind of annoyed me as a bit of a detail-oriented person, but overall it is a stunning model. The details on this model are as is to be expected, with the real turned brass bell, the details of the rivets, and also all the wonderful piping that you would expect from a scale Berkshire. For some reason, the Berkshires, in my opinion, are just some of the most handsome locomotives that are just so nicely proportioned that it just has its own presence when it's on a layout. For the 20th anniversary model of the Polar Express, Lionel did a great job of capturing the essence of a Christmas locomotive. The first thing that me and my friend noticed when we opened this locomotive out of its box was that the plasma blue reminded us of a locomotive running around a Christmas tree with multicolored lights just shining off of the paintwork. As a result, this model, in my opinion, is probably one of my favorite locomotives I've ever gotten to review, and really one of those that I will dearly miss once I give it back to my friend, as it is just a beautiful model that runs so well. For any of the other scale Berkshires, if they perform just as good as this one did, I would have no doubt and no problem suggesting any of them to you all out there, as these Berkshires will run forever, smoke up your way out like the real thing, and just give you hours of fun and joy along the fast main lines of the Nickel Plate Road or even the Perry Marquette. Overall, if you're able to find one of these models and be able to purchase one, I would highly suggest it, as they would be great models for the Christmas time, or just simply as a shelf queen sitting on its lonely shelf with any other locomotives that you may have in your collection. Such a beautiful locomotive overall. That wraps up this product review, but before you go, I just want to say thank you very much for the great patience you all have had, as I have been undergoing a tonsil surgery recovery, and unfortunately that pushed my release date back for this locomotive, and basically missed Christmas altogether. But hopefully you are currently watching this video before New Year's, as I had promised I would be able to get this video finished for. But without further ado, I also want to thank you all for clicking on this video and also watching it to the very end. It takes me a good while to produce these high quality videos for you all to enjoy, as it takes time to make the research for the history segments and also get through all the kinks when it comes to these brand new models right out of the Lionel's factory. If you would like to see any more of my future videos and no longer miss any updates that may come out of the GSMLR, I would like to suggest you click on that subscribe button, as that will instantly give you automatic notifications when I publish new comments or even new videos, whether they are these full-length videos or even the short formats. If you would also like to support my channel any further, please go ahead and click that like button, as that lets me know that you still like this type of content and would like to see more in the near future. And without further ado, my name is Trainmaster04, and I'll see you next time.
Dispatch, this is 3001. We are done for the day. Heading to the register room to sign out.